Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Toledo. Before we get started today, 22 years ago, 2,977 people lost their lives in the attacks on 9/11. I think everybody in the room knows exactly where they were when that tragedy occurred. So I would like to start today with a moment of silence in remembrance of the victims of 9/11. Kelly Trame, will you come to the podium, please, to deliver our reflection and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I sat on the wrong side of the room today. You know what happens. In honor of our speaker today, I chose a prayer for journalists from the University of Marquette. Strengthen and direct, we pray, the will of all whose work it is to write what many read and to speak where many listen. May we be bold to confront evil and injustice, understanding and compassionate of human weakness, rejecting alike the half-truth which deceives and the slanted word which corrupts. May the power which is ours, for good or ill, always be used with honesty and courage, with respect and integrity, so that when all there has been written, said and done, so we unashamed meet thee face to face. Amen. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. As we begin our meeting, I'd like to thank and acknowledge Equitable Advisors for this month's sponsor and Rotarian Jason Harris. So, Jason, thank you. Does anyone have any guests? If so, please go to the floor mic and introduce them, please.
Hello, President Travis and fellow Rotarians. It's my pleasure to introduce my guest and my husband, Bob Westfall. Bob is president of Vantage Healthcare of Ohio.
Excellent. Welcome.
Hello, President Travis. I have Valerie Walston, who is the Special Assistant to the President for Community Outreach and Strategic Partnerships. Close enough, at the University of Toledo.
That's amazing. Welcome.
Because I don't feel like we have enough Kellys in the room today, I'm happy to introduce Kelly Mofield from the Kidney Foundation of Northwest Ohio. She's the executive director there and hoping to join our club.
Excellent. Welcome.
President Travis and Rotarians, I have Bill Bissett with me, who's the new president of Lourdes University.
Oh, excellent. Welcome.
Good afternoon, President Travis. It's my honor to introduce Alicia Smith from the Junction Coalition, who is attempting to turn around the Junction neighborhood from years of underinvestment.
Excellent. Welcome. And please keep up your work. You're doing great. Okay. Glad everybody is here. I would like to call the mayor of Bowling, Thomas Romer, to the floor mic, please.
Testing. Okay. On October the 4th, we're going to have a fun night at Bolero. That's where we bowl. And where Rotarians have bowled all over Toledo for at least 60 years. So I've been bowling for 50, and I'm not any better than it was when I first started bowling. But anyway, Bolero Lane's on Monroe Street across from Best Buy, kind of across from Best Buy. It's a fun night. It's a free night. And if you have an interest, and we hope you do, you'll come and join us. We start about 4:30, and then we will start in earnest on October the 11th. So feel free to call me anytime. I'll give you a pep talk. We've got some slots available, and I promise you, you will get to know more Rotarians. It's such a great event. And like I said, this is a tradition that has gone on for at least 60 years. So thank you, Travis.
Thanks, Tommy. I don't think it's any secret how much fun bowling is. And for those of you, I've mentioned it before, for those of you who have never been out to bowling, please go out October 4th. I promise you it is a blast. And like I said, you meet some characters, and it's fantastic. So anyway, get out there. Tom, thank you. Brooke Schlageter, will you please come to the floor mic for an announcement?
Hi, everyone. I am Brooke Schlageter. This mic's a little tall for me. I'll look like this.
There you go.
I'm the Executive Director of Partners in Education. We're a nonprofit that was founded by the Rotary, and we do literacy and college and career readiness programming. I am standing up at the mic because I want to draw your attention to these little flyers that are in the middle of your table. We are in need of volunteers to help out with our literacy program. It is working one-on-one with students in grades K through 3. We are in 8 school locations around the city. The hours are 9 to 11 approximately, Monday through Thursday, and you can choose your own schedule. If you're interested, the contact information is at the bottom of the document, and you're welcome to reach out to me too. Additionally, if you know any organizations that might be interested in this work, please do connect me. Thank you all.
Thank you, Brooke. Past President Chuck Mann, will you please come to the podium?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. That's much better. 102 years ago, this club, the Rotary Club of Toledo, did a good thing. They donated a building at Camp Mayaconda that is called the Rotary Cabin. In the years since then, it has needed work. Rotary has stepped up to keep it under roof, under safe, and those of us who have an affinity for that particular cabin, as I walk by it, there's a cornerstone. The cornerstone has a brass plaque attached to it that says, "This cabin erected by the Toledo Rotary Club in 1920 and presented to the Toledo Boy Scout Council." Oftentimes, cornerstones have time capsules in them. That was the fashion. They did that back 102 years ago. So my curiosity got to me because we were doing work on it. Sort of a dangerous thing. A lot of people in the room know former Rotarian Butch Kruger, whose job used to be memorial stones. So I recruited Butch, and he and the camp ranger, Brady, and I, on Thursday, August 24th, took out the cornerstone. We didn't have any preconceived notions as to what was in it, other than the fact that we knew that there was a cavity behind it. We took it out. It's extremely heavy. You'll see it next week. It's solid marble. There are no cavities in it. A little disappointing. Yeah, it's a Geraldo Rivera moment. And thank God there were only 3 of us there. But there's Brady, who was closer to the operation than the rest of us. That's an interesting. Reached his hand down behind it in where there was concrete block and took out a metal box. The metal box is sealed. It's, well, you can see the size of it. It's
WD Company.
It's not huge. The date that the box was made is stamped on it, and it's about as well sealed as you can imagine. There is some rust to it. Right now, the box is sitting in a safe at Camp Mayaconda. It has not been opened. Scout's honor, the temptation is tremendous, but it has not been opened. Next week, we're going to open it. I've got a friend who may remain a friend or not, but he has volunteered to x-ray it. We'll see if that works out, but at this point, we don't know what's in it, if anything's in it. But if you'd like to find out whether it's a Geraldo Rivera moment or whether there might be something inside of it, show up next week. We will be, there's a better shot of it. We'll be meeting in the council lodge. The box will be there, and we will open the box right after we eat lunch. And we also hear a little bit about the scouting mission in Northwest Ohio. But that is the plan. There's a QR code that should be right. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Tell you your friends are with. There's the QR code. Feel free
That's
to.
the sandpiper. But
Here, you go ahead.
I had to do it, Chuck. Come on. This is Chuck next week, folks. We have no idea what's in there. It could be the treasure. It could be Geraldo. You never know. So, Chuck, thank you. Actually, I am going to back up a couple, so if anybody needs it. That is your QR code. Please RSVP if you are able to make it. Like I said, just with that lead up, it should be a fun time next week. So, thanks, Chuck. Next up, Sierra Hutton. Will you please come to the podium for a new member introduction?
Thank you, Sir Travis. I told him I wouldn't call him president at all this entire time. Before I get into the new member introduction I'm going to do, could you switch it back to the sandpiper for me so I could just give one final update? I promise after today, you will never have to hear me talk about the sandpiper again until next year. So our annual Rotary Sandpiper Ride takes off this Saturday at 5 p.m. and those aboard the Sandpiper will enjoy a beautiful sunset evening with fellow Rotarians and partners, family, friends, along with yummy food, and it is BYOB, so you're welcome to bring whatever you would like to drink as well. Tickets are still available for not for much longer though, since we do have to have numbers. So if you would like to purchase a ticket, hit the QR code here, talk to Jackie after the meeting. It's $30 a person, and we would love to have you. All right, I gotta get to the next thing. I'm telling you, if I do not prepare, I will get up here and just blank. If you've been pregnant before, you know your mind is not yours anymore for 9 full months and after. But I am excited and honored to introduce a new member, Emily Zarecki, who is a seasoned public relations and communications professional. Her 25-year career spans global Fortune 500 and 1,000 companies, as well as nonprofit agency PR support. Currently, Emily is the founder and chief storyteller for Clarion Communications. I probably said that wrong, I'm sorry. A PR consultant agency. She previously worked for quite a few different places, including Welltower, Owens Corning, and Mercy Health. Outside of PR, in that part of her career, Emily serves as the treasurer for the PRSA Northwest Ohio chapter and holds memberships with the Press Club of Toledo. Obviously now we are honored to have her in Rotary with us, and also with her hub of Women of Toledo. And she's also a founding member of Toledo Women for Good. Emily has served on the board for Unison Health and supported fundraising efforts for NAMI, known as National Association of Mental Illness, Toledo, in memory for her husband Steve, and as a recent breast cancer survivor, Emily is enthusiastic about advocating for research and education about breast cancer, and she serves as an advocacy ambassador for Susan G. Komen. She's one of my favorite things about Emily, and I think I ask her about this every time I see her, is she is writing a book. And it's going to be a lot about her journey through her cancer journey and whatnot, and finding purpose and creating joy throughout that process. And her memoir will be published this coming spring. And outside of all of this, as if that wasn't enough, she is also a mother of 3 and lives in Sylvania with her husband, Mark. So we're so excited to have you. You want to say? Okay.
Welcome, Emily. Thank you, Sierra. Allison Hammonds, will you please come to the podium for a new member introduction?
Hello, everyone. This is Troy Hill, everybody. I am really happy to introduce Troy. Wow, these lights are bright. You do this every Monday? Wow. Anyways, okay, so Troy and I actually go back quite a few years. We met through Leadership Toledo. Many of you have probably heard of that organization, but we sat on the board together and had many discussions about governance, because we were also on the governance committee together. We had to redo that whole committee. So that was a really fun experience because we didn't know what we were doing. We got some help and we figured it out. So I've really enjoyed getting to know Troy. He is a wonderful man, and so I'm sure all of you are going to get to know him as well. But let me tell you a little bit more about Troy. So Troy is Vice President of Development, Business Development with Front Door Marketing, and they are actually located just this way. What is it?
Just down the street, 5th, 3rd field.
There you go.
2nd floor.
There you go. So he's a local downtownian. He is, his favorite interests are family, business, networking, and boating. So he loves to network, so if you want to get to know him, just give him a call, have some lunch, have some coffee. He also, why did he want to become a Rotarian? Fellowship, meet others, professional enrichment, opportunity to learn and serve. So he really has that servant heart, and we're really happy to have him. Troy Hill leads Front Door Marketing's new sales efforts and helps develop customer branding strategies. He applies his entrepreneurial spirit to finding innovative ways to expand their company. Troy's previous work history includes 5 years managing the sales team for a prominent promotional products distributor. Before joining FDM, he was the sales director for a leading medical device company. Troy has a master's degree in organizational leadership from Lourdes University, as well as an undergraduate degree from the University of Toledo and Owens Community College. He has served as board president for Leadership Toledo, as a member of the Lourdes, the Lourdes University Marketing Committee. Troy lives in Sylvania with his wife Julie and their 3 children, Charlie and twins, Luke and Kate. They also have an English cream golden retriever named Annie. Please welcome Troy to Rotary.
Thank you, Allison. Welcome, Troy. Going to less fun things. Obviously, everyone has heard about the devastation in Maui. We have a video that is from Rotary International and District 5000. So if you could play that, please.
From the Rotary Club of Thickham Pearl Harbor. In the aftermath of the recent challenges faced by our community on Maui, District 5000, known for its commitment to service and community support, has launched the Maui Fires Relief Fund through its district foundation. This relief fund aims to provide immediate assistance and long-term recovery support to the people of Maui as they navigate the path to rebuilding their lives and communities. As people of action, members of Rotary recognizes the importance of coming together during times of crisis. The Maui Fires Relief Fund is an embodiment of the spirit, symbolizing the collective strength and resilience of our community. The fund is designed to address urgent needs and provide sustainable solutions to assist those affected by the recent wildfires. The District Foundation also established a committee that will work diligently to identify the most critical needs and allocate resources effectively. By centralizing the relief efforts into a single fund, the goal is to provide comprehensive and impactful assistance over an extended period. Rotary clubs, individuals, businesses, and organizations are invited to contribute to the Maui Fires Relief Fund. It'll help provide immediate relief and support for the long-term recovery of Maui's communities. As we face the challenges together, Rotary District 5000 remains committed to creating hope and facilitating support for our neighbors on Maui. Your donations, no matter the size, will make a difference in rebuilding lives and providing a brighter future. To donate or learn more about the Maui Fires Relief Fund, please visit rotaryd5000.org/Maui Relief. Your support will play a vital role in helping Maui recover. Mahalo.
So, as we as Rotarians always do, keep everyone in Maui in your thoughts. If you can help them, please do. Also remember that Walt Churchill's Market is rounding up at the register. So if you do some shopping down at Walt Churchill's, you can ask them to round up your bill, and that will go to Maui Relief as well. So thank you. Kurt Frank, will you please come to the podium and introduce today's guest speaker, Keith Burris.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kurt Frank. I'm the president and executive editor of The Blade, and it's a pleasure being here today. Our speaker that will be here just shortly has a long list of accomplishments. Excuse me a second. I'm going to get this closer so everybody can hear me. He's an award-winning columnist and editorial writer. He's a book biographer. He's a scholar, and I'll go into more detail on that in a couple minutes, or in a minute or so. And you can read his thought-provoking commentaries every Sunday in The Blade. I have known and worked with Keith Burris for more than 10 years. Over that time, Keith has had a variety of jobs at The Blade and our sister newspaper, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let me go through some of those, but before I say that, I kind of get exhausted when I list all the hats that Keith has worn over his 10 years coming back to The Blade. And for those that love stats, Keith has written more than 840 columns for The Blade and the Post-Gazette. And that does not include the editorials he wrote for both newspapers that don't contain his byline, but he's speaking for the institution. Keith was hired back in March 2013 as an associate editor of The Blade's editorial page, where he wrote editorials for the Pages of Opinion. It was his second stint at The Blade. He worked at The Blade as an editorial writer in the 1980s, where he did a good job, and then he moved on to the Hartford Courant as an editorial writer there. During his time at The Blade, Keith has stayed in the position for a couple of years until I was able to have lunch with him one day and convince him to come to the newsroom and be our Metro columnist. And my goodness, he did a wonderful job, beyond my expectations. As the Blade's Metro columnist, he wrote and broke news. He undercovered wrongdoing, and he held people accountable. And he did this in all of his columns in a witty and clever fashion. I still miss him as the Metro columnist. Keith has had a successful, boy, the lighting in this room is awful. Either that or I'm getting really old. I apologize. After his second stint as the Blade Metro columnist, he became the editorial page editor of The Blade, followed by the editorial director and vice president of both The Blade and the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And if that's not enough, he then took on the role as the executive editor of the Post-Gazette. As I mentioned before, Keith is also a book author. In 2013, he wrote Deep River, The Life and Music of Robert Shaw. The biography is a rich and in-depth look at Robert Shaw, a complex man, and his drive to transform choral music in America. 5 years earlier, again, the overachiever was the editor of the No Fault Politics, which is a book by the late Senator Eugene McCarthy. Before returning to the Blade in 2013, Keith worked for 21 years as the editorial page editor at the Journal-Enquirer in Manchester, Connecticut. I consider Keith a scholar because he has an undergraduate degree at Kent State. He's a master's and a PhD in political science and philosophy from the University of Pittsburgh, and he's also taught at several American colleges and universities, and he just told me today that he's teaching now at Lord's University. In closing, Keith is married to Amy McConnell Burris, a teacher and a wonderful artist. They both have grown children. They're Alexander, Sophia, goes by Sophie, and William. Keith and Amy split their time between Pittsburgh and Toledo. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to welcome to the lectern Dr. Keith Burris. Thank you.
Well, there's no way I could live up to that introduction. I just want to say a word about Kurt Frank, who I'm so honored and happy to call him my friend, and many of you may not know he's one of the funniest, most witty people I think I've ever met, and he's got to do serious work all the time, so you would not know that unless you'd work with him probably. And also probably the bravest person I know. And I should also invoke our mutual friend Joe Zerby, who the first time I spoke to Toledo Rotary, I was sitting at the table and Joe came by, I thought to say good luck and break a leg and stuff like that. And he leaned in and whispered to me, "Don't go too heavy on the liberal BS, okay?" Filled me with confidence. So, and it's a solemn day, so I want to kind of dedicate this talk to two people, our old Rotary friend Doug Neckers, and also a great citizen of a second great person. Both of these guys are just great gentlemen and good guys. Judd Johnson, who many of you probably know or knew. So I think the best way to do something like this is to just throw out some propositions and not talk, for me, not to talk too much or too long, and to leave enough time for Q&A, because that's the really fun part. And you can kind of take the thing in any direction you want. So I've got two slides. They're not very sophisticated, but they're kind of a step beyond crayons. But see if I can figure out how to bring the first one up here. So this is sort of divided into two parts, this talk. One is a report card on American democracy. And this is subjective, but I hope clinical and careful. And I thought I'd just go through the basic, not the basic, but the sort of the ones I've chosen as the important American political institutions. So what's the health of our political institutions? And I've got 4 categories: thriving, stable, troubled, and dysfunctional. And I know, feel free to disagree with how I've categorized, but this is just a basis for discussion to get us going. The presidency, I think, is stabilized, whether you're a fan of President Biden's or not. He's sort of restored the office to its traditional mores and ways of operating. The U.S. House, I think we could
most of us would agree is not functional right now. What I mean by that is they're not able to produce legislation or do oversight, which are the two primary functions of a legislative body. A friend of mine who's a longtime aide in the House said the way things used to work is that each side would come to a meeting, maybe a conference meeting or writing up a bill, and there'd be a point of compromise. The Democrats would come with their stuff, and the Republicans would say, no, here's our counter. And he said, now it's sort of people come for war. Each side comes ready to yell at the other side. They don't really come prepared with, oh, here's some middle ground that we can work on together. So I think the House is dysfunctional. The Senate is not as bad. They're not producing legislation. They are doing oversight. Mitch McConnell is a very savvy operator, and he certainly keeps the place moving. But someone like Senator Portman, for example, who was very interested in actually getting things done, left the Senate kind of in despair because he couldn't get things done anymore. He's a guy who works across the aisle. Anytime he had a bill, the first thing he'd do is find a Democrat to co-sponsor it with him. That's increasingly difficult, and there aren't many people following the Portman model right now. So the Senate troubled, but not as troubled as the House. Executive branch agencies, you know, the State Department lost a lot of personnel in the last administration. The Justice Department had many troubles. I think it's stabilizing. State legislatures, troubled. And the reason they're troubled is because they become so highly ideological. It's hard even for a Republican governor like Mike DeWine to work with the legislature in Ohio, predominant, overwhelmingly Republican legislature. Mayors of big cities also troubled, but sort of on the other end of the ideological spectrum. I spend part of my time in Pittsburgh where the homelessness problem is a kind of a mini San Francisco situation. If you're familiar with San Francisco's problem or LA's, there's a sort of inability to admit the nature of the problem in many of the big cities of the country. So you have among mayors, a kind of locked in ideologically on the left, and in most legislatures, many legislatures, I shouldn't say most, locked in on the right, and inability to deal with problems or to talk to people on the other side intelligently because of that. Mayors of small towns, on the other hand, you can't quite see the X's at the end of town, but they're thriving. Now, that's interesting because many of the small towns in Ohio and Pennsylvania don't have much money, but I would argue that's where the real creativity is in American government right now. They're finding ways to keep their towns going and keep them vital and alive. Kurt and I are both from small towns in Ohio. Newark, his hometown, or what we called NERC, was the big city where I grew up in Coshocton, Ohio. That was a thrill to drive to Newark and see a movie. Well, those are really hard-pressed towns these days. Not much money, not much industry, and the mayors of those kind of towns really have to scramble to make things work. The press is troubled for probably Kurt could speak more eloquently to that than I could, but I mean, one of the major problems is you know, we have supply and demand in capitalism, and the demand for sort of curated press, for this is a whole other discussion, we could talk about it sometime, but the demand for curated journalism is not what it once was. Trump trials, I'll pivot to that in a second. That's a very troubling situation, I think, on many levels for the country. It seems to me that people on both ends of the ideological spectrum kind of forget about the country. There are some people, many of them are my friends or former friends, who they want to see Donald Trump in jail, period, no matter what that would cost. And then we know that there's a core Trump constituency that believes he's being prosecuted for purely political reasons. It's the whole thing that we've started, the road we've started down. If you're not troubled by it, I'd like to talk to your minister or your psychiatrist. Shared cultural values, and this is really kind of, I think, the deeper problem that we're suffering from now. Is that we don't have a common culture. We don't have a common political culture. We don't have a common belief in the sacredness of the Constitution. We don't much believe in the kind of political folkways that Senator Portman, for example, practiced, or that Mike DeWine practices. We don't have a really professional political class. We have people who, we had a governor in Pennsylvania for 8 years who he started at the top, as people like to do now. My first election is going to be for governor, senator, or president, and many of those folks literally do not understand our system, or less critically, don't really understand the folkways of politics. So I think that's the really deep problem. And now I'll give you a quick, so we can have lots of Q&A. I'll give you a quick tour. And again, this is subjective through the Trump melodrama that we're now in. I called this Trump Agonistes after Gary Will's book about Nixon. So just a quick tour through the cases, and again, subjective reading. The New York case, to me, is most unfortunate. I don't understand. It doesn't seem like very good law, and I don't understand why any of us, why the country needs to care about Donald Trump paying off someone he had an affair with. I mean, it just doesn't, to me, relate enough to the common good to justify a legal case. The Florida documents case, in a way, is even more ludicrous because it just didn't have to happen, but it's legally probably a slam dunk. I mean, it's clear. I mean, you have guys like Bill Barr saying, yeah, absolutely, the law was broken here, and obstruction is probably almost as clear. So next we have the DC case, where we have a very careful prosecutor who's built his case very carefully. I'm just not sure that the three major charges, the three major counts, closely align enough with some kind of statute. For instance, the first charge is basically the former president defrauded the country, but you can't really find a statute that says that. So it seems to me that though he's a very careful and very professional prosecutor, he's going to have trouble lining up the charges with actual law on the books. But it's coming to a primary, Super Tuesday near us next fall, which is mind-boggling. And Judge Ludig, some of you may know his name, he's a major constitutional expert and really a Republican constitutional expert. I mean, he walked 2 or 3 of the sitting justices on the Supreme Court through the confirmation process. So he's a very conservative and studious and pardon the pun, judicious sort of person. He says that the prosecutors will find a way to sequence these trials so that it's not sort of total chaos. And he thinks the Smith case, which he regards as the most serious, will come first. Then we have the Georgia case, which of course is testing the RICO laws, which are written for organized crime. But there are some very literal matchups that prosecutor can come up with, and particularly the 11,000 plus vote question. That's I think pretty clearly a violation of Georgia law. Possible outcomes. This is where it gets fun. What I call the Agnew solution. Some of you remember that great statesman Spiro T. Agnew. Spiro, to his credit at least, went quietly. The Department of Justice had the goods on him, and they went to him. It's never been clear to me what President Nixon had to do with it, how much or how little, but the Justice Department went to him and said, the jig is up, we have the goods, but you could just resign and disappear. And that's, everyone says there's no way Donald Trump would do that. There's no way he's going to agree to absent himself from politics. But, you know, if you're facing jail time, that could change anyone's attitude, it seems to me. So that's one possibility, is that Justice Department says, look, or even conceivably the president, whoever the president is at that point, would say, you know, a pardon, but you've got to go into the blue. Second possibility is diminution of Trump as the trials wear on. The polls, as you all know, are moving in the opposite direction now. The trials are actually helping him to raise money and helping him in the polls. But it may well be, as all this starts to accumulate, that that he starts to fade, that Republican primary voters say, okay, let's find someone we like almost as much, but it's not going to work with Trump. But for that to happen, someone else needs to catch on, which of course hasn't happened yet. Some would say the strongest possible candidates aren't in the race yet, but the governor of Florida has not emerged as a strong alternative to Trump. But it could still happen. We still got a lot of time. Civil unrest is a possibility as this has moved on, or as it moves on, but it hasn't happened yet, and I think that's a good thing. We haven't had riots at the courthouses. And then finally, I mean, I think it's possible that Mr. Trump would leave the country and go kind of into exile, and could even be a hero to people from there. So that's maybe a little more subjective than the first slide, but that's a quick tour just for purposes of discussion and debate through the Trump trials. So that's maybe you don't want to talk about any of that, but that opens the floor to you folks. Or we could just, Phil.
The Rotary. I wonder what your thoughts are on having the Smith trial, if you want to call it that, the open and to the public for you know, public television airing of the what kind of pressure, if that's the right word, that we could put on Justice Roberts to make that an open trial.
You know, I'm of two minds. I just fear that it becomes an OJ sort of thing, that it becomes a circus, and so as a journalist, I really ought to argue for televising it, but I'm not sure that would be good for the country. And I think the written press can handle this. But that's really, I think the judges are going to make the call.
Hey, Keith, I'm wondering, I would just like to ask you to clarify something, if you would. Just go into a little more detail here. On the first slide, you talk about the major breakdown of common values. And your first point on the second slide is people shouldn't care about the Stormy Daniels trial.
Mm-hmm.
I see a contradiction in that. Let me explain.
Sure.
I'm a child of the late 60s and early 70s. I did not come of age then, but I was around long enough to know that social mores were no better or worse back then. But I would dare say that people would have cared if the President of the United States was having an affair with a porn star, even if it was years in the past. And I agree it's not the most important thing facing the United States, but in light of your observation, your astute and accurate observation that culture is divided now, I still think that what he did and the cover-up money is something that people should care about. And I'm just wondering if you can put a little more detail into your conclusion.
Well, your viewpoint is a respectable viewpoint. I keep trying to dodge that light.
It's probably going to follow you. I don't know.
It's I feel like I'm going to be interrogated at any moment. I mean, your viewpoint is totally respectable and understandable. And you're right, there's a distinction between his personal life and the cover-up money, which is where it's always the cover-up with these guys. But I would also caveat this answer with this. With Trump, admittedly, we're always, to use Daniel Patrick Moynihan's phrase, defining deviancy down. I mean, there's no other politician whose career would have gone on after the Stormy Daniels thing or his conviction for sexual assault, or you name it, insulting John McCain. But I think given the gravity of all this other stuff, this is the least of our problems, really. Stormy Daniels is the least of our problems. His payoffs to various people for various things. I'm really concerned about the common values that I'm talking about are peaceful transition of power, respect for the Constitution, respect for the presidency itself, respect for the Congress. I mean, these are, and it's not just Trump, but clearly his constituency or the core constituency feels, hey, it's okay to cut a few corners to get the country that we think we want. So that's what I'm really concerned about is, when we talked about Agnew, when Nixon was in trouble and nearly done, it was Barry Goldwater, and John Rhodes, the Republican leader of the House, and Hugh Scott, the Senate leader from Pennsylvania, who went to the White House and said, we're speaking to you as fellow Americans, as professional politicians, and as leaders of the Congress, and you're done. So you had to have leaders who would do that, and you had to have a president who recognized he was done when he was done. And these are just obvious examples of the common set of rules that we all used to. I mean, no one debated such things, So to me, that's the big thing that we have to keep before us. And Stormy Daniels, Trump is Trump. Yes, sir.
My question is about the Senate. I grew up in Pakistan reading about British history and parliament, and the rule was that the first past the poll wins. If you get the majority more than 50%, you are the winner. in the Senate, I've been reading for years, the filibuster is the issue in which you need 60 people to approve something. So I think over the years, all I read about the Senate, that has been the biggest problem, that you cannot pass a resolution, you cannot legislate, and things get stuck for years.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not democracy, it's 60 people you need, 40% can block it.
Yeah. Yeah, and at this point, maybe you have to change the rules, but that's a good example of what I'm talking about. The filibuster it's sort of a crazy rule, but in previous years and generations, it was not abused. Neither party abused it. It was sort of like we use this when it's really dire straits and we're at the end of our ropes. So that's what I mean by folkways. There were certain kind of accepted limits on this is a power we can use, but we're not going to use it all the time. We're not going to use it to shoot down a president's nomination for the Supreme Court. We have this Senator Tuberville, but another guy who started at the top, a football coach who decided he wanted to be a U.S. Senator. So he's now playing with a rule that's been there forever. Nobody even knows about it. Senators can block, one senator can block a nominee for anything, postmaster in Sheboygan. And it just wasn't done except in very rare cases, and a senator might do it as leverage. He might hold up a nominee for a few weeks to get a bill he wanted through a committee. But now this guy he does it on a regular basis. We can't get people confirmed for the Joint Chiefs. So it's just these kind of abuses of rules that were perhaps arcane, but they weren't really hurting anyone. And there was another folkway was to respect tradition, so that even Joe Biden was against repealing the filibuster. Now we're in a sort of different world, but rather than more burning things to the ground, I'd like to see us start to get back to the old civilities. Yes, Bob.
Keith, thanks for coming. Question, at least in my view, and I've heard other people say this, I think one of the worst influences on the political climate, and to some degree the climate beyond that in the country, is the media, and I'm not talking about newspapers or either of the two of you, maybe primarily television, and where folks go to see sources, and you've got media on both sides of the aisle, in my opinion, is borderline unwatchable. Where most people are in this middle or at least more to the center, and you've got the call for 24-hour news stations that need content, and they just keep promoting all the stories that we've just been talking about here. And do you want to comment on that, and also the future of that? Will that change or continue? I mean, continue in some form or fashion.
I wish I knew the future. And it's not content. It's sort of a combination of repeated headline services, repeated ad nauseum, and then this kind of ideological partisan stuff. That's return in some ways the partisanship to the press of the 1900s. And if you were doing a history of the American press, you would look at sort of 1920 to say the 80s as the period where American journalism grew up. And even in television, we had Edward R. Murrow, we had Eric Sevareid, we had Huntley and Brinkley, Cronkite. Those were carefully put together news programs, and Murrow made fantastic documentaries, better than are made now. So we've sort of gone backwards, and I think television, I don't know how, other than that Fox found an audience, how things became so terribly polemical and ideological. But that's the world we're living in now. And at some point, readers, thinkers, citizens are going to have to demand something better. I think some of the podcasts that exist in the world now are kind of positive signs, but they let social media lead them. So that, you know, many folks in television forgot they were journalists, and now social media kind of leads media. But we really need a press in this country. And we need not just a media, but a press, especially in cities and in state capitals. State capitals, I think this is 20 years from now, we're going to figure out, wow, no one was covering state capitals and it all went to hell. Yes, sir.
Mr. Burris, thank you for being here. Really was intrigued by the headline that was behind your name about how the free press can help democracy, but I haven't really heard a whole lot about that. So I'm going to sort of move in a direction that Bob sort of started. How do we make journalism less journaltainment and push it into a more moral, ethical watchdog of the government? Maybe you don't have the answer, maybe you just gave it, but I feel like I can't get good information, whether it's from a podcast. I mean, it's so hard to dig for it, and that's what makes the mass media as journalists so compelling, but I can't find it. And maybe you just gave the answer.
Well, I think there are pockets. I mean, there are very few papers in the country that have covered local government as aggressively as the Blade. So, you know, support the Blade. Support local journalism, but also support the journalism that you find is informing you. The Atlantic, for example, I think does a fantastic job, and it's a daily product. Wall Street Journal, fantastic product. Support good journalism where you see it. And if you feel like someone is informing you, if it's a podcast, support that. This Substack is a new platform really based on writers and readers directly supporting writers. So if you find a writer, and I don't mean who speaks to you emotionally, because we've got way too much of that, but someone who you feel is making you smarter, is making you think about things you hadn't thought about, or informing you about things you didn't know about, support that institution or that writer. That's the best answer I can give you. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Keith, for your remarks. I'd like to get your take on going forward with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Hunter Biden. It's hard to, even though you can read the Wall Street Journal and PBS and the Blade, but it's difficult to get going forward, get an assessment. That I'd like to hear your viewpoint on that.
Well, are you talking about the president's reelection, or are you just talking about the situation with his son?
Well, no, going forward, I mean, on the big picture, going forward with, Joe Biden for the next 4 years and Kamala Harris and the issues. I'd like to get your take on just, it's difficult to get an objective view.
Yeah. I think that, I don't want to get into a partisan thing. I mean, I think the president has restored dignity and faith to the office. I know you want to tell people they can go if they want. Okay. That said, and I think history will treat Joe Biden very well. I think it would be healthy for the country if we had a fresh slate going into this next election. If the Democrats had to fight it out and find a new face, Vice President Harris could compete with others, and the Republicans, we're going to move beyond Trump. Maybe we nominate someone who's Trumpian, but someone who at least believes in the rule of law. It'd be helpful to have a president who believes in the rule of law. I mean, that's the oath It's a very simple oath. So I think it would be healthy for the country to turn the page. As far as Hunter, I just, the guy is clearly a ne'er-do-well, and that's gonna work its way through the courts. I don't think it has much to do with his father's presidency or with the future of the country.
Thank you, Keith. I have a book I'd like to give to you. I can hand it to you in a sec if you'd like. I appreciate you being here. Thank you all for your patience. I know we ran really late. We did get started very late, so that's part of it. But the information and content was too important, and I really appreciate you presenting it. In appreciation for you being here, we will be giving you a copy of Historical Tales of Toledo, which was authored by past President Clint Mock. We'll also be making a donation in your name to the Polio Plus campaign. So again, thank you very much for being here. Okay, we may have mentioned it once or twice today, but next week we'll be Rotary on the Road at Camp Miaconda. So please come help Indiana Jones over there figure out what's inside the time capsule. We will be back here in the Glass City Center on September 25th, when we'll be joined by Rita Saronin, who is the president and CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. So make sure you're here for that one. There are 2 committee meetings this afternoon. Membership will be meeting in Summit A. Youth Services will be in Summit B. And with that, we are adjourned. Go out and create some hope, folks.